Good morning, Witta's Wolves. It is Wednesday, May. We are in May 6th. And where in the universe is Mrs. Witta this morning? Well, you guys guessed it, or Isabel guessed it during our Zoom meeting yesterday that I was on Tatooine, which is a planet in Star Wars. Today, I'm in our true universe. What planet is Mrs. Witta on? This planet is known as the swiftest planet. It's also known as the rocky planet or a rocky planet. This planet does not have any moons. There is one more detail I want to tell you about it. One day on this planet, the time it takes for this planet to rotate or spin once with respect to the stars takes 59 Earth days. So on this planet you cannot breathe. Where in the universe is Mrs. Witta this morning? All right, today in our learning, you guys have been learning about and watching videos about theme. Theme is the message or the moral or the lesson that a story is teaching. Today, you're going to listen to the instructions and you're going to write about silver dollar dreams. And the theme of silver dollar dreams is, you guys have already determined that yesterday and you looked at it, well, looking at it yesterday, you read about it on Monday. And you want to have 3 details to support that. So the theme of Silver Dollar Dreams is, fill in that blank, because, and you're going to put detail 1, detail 2, detail 3. So those details support how that theme is taught or how it's seen in the story. And then you're going to complete, in life, you should, and you're going to restate what the theme or message is, and then you're going to put your own opinion. I think this because, and then you'll state what your opinion is. You can write this in pencil on a paper, or if you if you do that, please write darkly so that when you take a picture I can see it, or take a really close picture. You can also type it into the journal on your class profile. So either way, you may submit that. In math, you've got 2 practice problems with the input and output. You've had plenty of practice on that, so you're going to go ahead and do that. Again, take a picture, submit it, or you can draw it out, or you can print it. Anyway, and then get that sent in. In science, you get to research an endangered species. So this is an animal that is close to extinction, and extinction means that it will no longer be if they all die. So I'd like for you to research that. There's a link there that you can choose to help you decide what endangered species you want to use. And then there's also a database that you can use. I'm going to show you a picture of what it looks like. You've got that attached to your lesson plans. This is something that Mrs. Jones has provided. It shows you the username and password for each database. Use that to find out the following information. First, you want to have a picture. You're going to draw a picture of that endangered species. This is what Max shared with us yesterday in our Zoom meeting. And you want to, of course, name who the animal is, where the animal lives, conservation status, meaning how many of them are left, what's being done to maintain this species, to keep them alive, to help them to go through the life cycle and recreate themselves. And then interesting facts. List 1 or 2 interesting facts about this endangered species. So lots of fun learning to do today. All right, the world according to Humphrey. We are now on chapter 4, the most important man in the world. I wonder who the most important man in the world is. Luckily, Friday went by smoothly. Sorry to say, Saya didn't raise her hand, but Heidi Hopper did, amazingly. AJ actually whispered. Richie cleaned my cage. I tried to imagine with a big black mustache like his Uncle Aldo. Later, when Mrs. Brisbane asked him to name the capital of Kentucky, Richie said, hot dog. Everyone giggled, of course, especially stopped giggling Gail, otherwise known as Gail Morgenstern. Repeat that, please, Richie, said the teacher. Richie realized he'd made a mistake, so he tried again. Frankfurter, he said. More giggles, explosive giggles. Try again, Richie, said Mrs. Brisbane, who was on the verge of smiling herself. Frankfurt, he said proudly. That was the correct answer, by the way. So you see, it wasn't exactly a bad day in room 26. It's just that I was jittery, wondering what would happen to me when the bell rang. Would I be left alone? Hungry? Utterly forsaken for 2 whole days? Or would I be a captive in the haunted house of Mrs. Brisbane? At last, the bell rang and the students flew out the door like a flock of homing pigeons in a movie Miss Mack showed us. Just then, the room mothers stopped by. One was Heidi Hopper's mom, and the other one was Art Patel's. That's pay attention, Art. They came to talk to Mrs. Brisbane about Halloween, which was less than 2 weeks away. I didn't know what Halloween was, but it sure sounded scary, especially when they talked about bringing bats and witches and even worse, cats right into the classroom. Shiver, quiver, shake. What could they be thinking? I was about ready to fling open the door of my cage and escape when the door opened and in walked Principal Mr. Morales. Mr. Morales is the most important person at Longfellow School. He runs the place and everyone respects him. You can tell. For one thing, Mr. Morales always wears a tie. No one else in the whole school wears a tie except Mr. Morales. For another thing, when Mr. Morales comes into my room, everyone stops what they're doing and waits to see what he has to say. And for a third thing, both Miss Mack and Mrs. Brisbane sometimes threaten to send a misbehaving student to Mr. Morales' office. As soon as the teacher mentioned the principal's name, the student would start acting very, very nice. Good afternoon, ladies, said Mr. Morales. He was wearing a light blue shirt and a tie that had tiny books all over it. Everyone said, hello. Well, how's your first week back, Sue? He asked. Sue was apparently Mrs. Brisbane, although I'd never actually thought of her of having a first name before. She said it was great to be back and what a wonderful class it was, which obviously pleased the room mothers. Then Mr. Morales leaned over my cage and smiled. His tie dangled right over my head. I bet you're enjoying this furry little pupil, he said with a grin. I expected Mrs. Brisbane to tell him what a trouble-making rodent I was, but instead she forced a smile and said, well, yes, but he's quite a bit of extra work. Mr. Morales waved a finger at me. He didn't seem to hear what Mrs. Brisbane said. I always wanted one of these fellows, he said, but my papa wouldn't let me have one. Sure is cute. Mrs. Brisbane cleared her throat. Yes, but I'm afraid he's a little distracting. I was going to see if Mr. Kim in room 12 wants him. I was shocked. Luckily, so were the room moms. Oh, no! The children just love Humphrey, said Mrs. Patel. Heidi talks about him all the time, and it's a wonderful way to teach the kids responsibility, Mrs. Hopper said. Yes, but it's a little too much responsibility for me, Mrs. Brisbane sighed. At least I have a couple days away from him this weekend. You're not taking him home with you? Asked Mrs. Patel. Mrs. Brisbane backed away from the cage. Oh, no, it's out of the question. But Miss Mack always took him home, said Mrs. Hopper. He'll be fine. He has plenty of food, Mrs. Brisbane answered very, very firmly. The room mothers were silent for a second. Mr. Morales was still wiggling his finger at me. Then Mrs. Hopper spoke up. Why don't the kids take turns bringing Humphrey home for the weekend? They can sign up, we'll talk to their parents and give them instructions. It will be a great experience. Some people might not want him, said Mrs. Brisbane. Squeak for yourself, Mrs. Brisbane. That's fine, said Mrs. Hopper. There'll be plenty who will. I think it's great, Mrs. Patel agreed. I'd take him today, but we're going to the lake for the weekend. Oh, I'd take him too, said Mrs. Hopper, but we're painting the house and the place is a mess. Next week for sure. Yes, I could do it next week, Mrs. Patel agreed. Mrs. Brisbane smiled a fake smile. So, who's going to take him this weekend? The room mothers looked at one another. I can make a few quick calls. Maybe they're Naldi's, Mrs. Patel called. Call, 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 I squeaked. Suddenly, Mr. Morales stood up straight. I have a better idea, he announced. Let me try that again. I have a better idea, he announced. I'll take Humphrey home for the weekend. My kids will love him. Then, starting next week, you can have the students take turns. The three women were almost as surprised as I was. Don't worry. He'll be in good hands, Mr. Morales assured them. Well, I guess I would be. After all, I was going home with the most important person at Longfellow School. I'm going to go ahead and stop there, and we will read more about that tomorrow, Thursday. Have a great day.